Alrighty. Well, today I'd like to give you a little bit of background on the Manitoba dry bean year that we had this past year, just to kind of give you a bit of background to some of the other speakers that are moving on here or coming in later on. The one thing you want to really keep in mind when you're looking at the dry beans is it's a true field to fork. Dry beans are cleaned, processed, and then shipped or bagged to the processors for canning and packaging. So there's really not a lot of processing that gets done to it. Navy beans for canning can be used, or navy beans that are used for canning, typically will be covered in tomato sauce to cover up any slight blemishes. Beans sold in a can will have low crack seed coats. Otherwise, what happens is you get this situation here. We're going to go to, you're going to get this situation here where you see a lot of high crack seed coats. So I always like to start off with these slides because it really shows, agronomists and farmers as well, that we're really close to what what comes off the field is what we're actually eating. Not a lot of processing that gets done. So for dry bean acres, it was kind of exciting this year because we did actually see a lot more acres than what we've seen in the past. We ended up with about 185,000 acres in Manitoba. That's higher than what we had last year. And last year we were in that 150,000 acre range. And there were lots of excitement this year. Prices were really good going into the spring, and growers had some pretty good expectations of what the crop was going to be like, even though last year there was some real issues with the yields. This particular slide that you're seeing up here now is kind of interesting because it's going to kind of give you a bit of a background to what I'm talking about. These are slides that I presented in 2002 on dry bean production in Manitoba. Some of the same things we presented in 2002, I'm going to be talking about today again because there are a lot of the same issues. So things like frost. We did have a frost this year, and frost can be really devastating to a dry bean crop in early September. We're going to be talking a little other things that we ran into this year with earth tag and disease issues. We're still dealing with some other disease issues like white mold every year as well, although this year wasn't an extremely bad year for white mold. The one challenge that we had this year in the western part of the province was the fall frost in early September. Here's a couple of pictures here of a couple of dry bean crops that come early September, looked a little frosty, and there were some real concerns, and these are both navy bean fields. Overall, the frost, though, was not that bad in most of the area of Manitoba. And I guess I got my slide on automatic here. So, but what's happening in the West is we did see that hard frost in early September. The leaves dropped, and in some cases, we started to see some real yellowing in the samples. And that yellowing also caused, because there was lots of moisture in there, caused some staining. And this was mostly in the navies and blacks in the western side of the province. So from Morden up on the escarpment west and going all the way to the Souris-Brandon area, we did see some higher frost damage. Overall, the crop was still quite marketable yet. Picks or damage range from 5 to 10%. The beans in the River Valley, though, were much better. We actually saw some really good yields this past year as well. Pintos were the really interesting one for us in Manitoba. And what we did see is we're probably going to break a record for pintos yields in Manitoba with just over 2,400 pounds. I'm still waiting for the numbers from crop insurance yet. So that's what remains to be seen yet. And we also saw over 95,000 acres of pintos grown in Manitoba as well. So that was another record year as well. Just something to kind of keep in mind. Bacterial blight was probably one of the most predominant diseases that we did see this year, especially in the kidney beans and cranberry beans this year. With bacterial blight on the pods, you'll see these lesions show up, and if they penetrate the seed pod, they can actually affect the quality. Now, with bacterial blight, a lot of it is brought on by when we have hail, high winds, blowing sand, that type of thing. This was a very windy year in Manitoba this year, and we did see a lot of damage to some of the plants. In particular, the kidneys and cranberries had the most amount of damage. It did reduce the yields for some growers, but still overall, we're still quite respectable in the 1,800 to 1,900 pound range. A few other things to mention about bacterial blight. As far as control measures, you know, there's really not a lot of really good control measures. You can't just go out and, like you do for weeds, and spray it and it's all your problems are gone. You have to start off with things like planting disease-free seed. It's really important to get good quality seed in the ground. As I mentioned before, kidneys and crayons are a lot more susceptible than blacks and pintos. So depending on the type that you're growing, a 2 to 3 year crop rotation also makes that a lot better. However, if you're on a 2-year rotation on a kidney bean and you've had a lot of bacterial blight, you may need to stretch that out a lot more, even into that 3 to 4 year rotation, because I have seen some real challenges with that this year. Trying to bury the plant debris to help it break down. There's a bit of a challenge with that as well, because as you know, when you work dry bean ground, it in the fall, it looks pretty black and it's a lot more prone to soil erosion. So that you have to be very cautious when you do that. There are some copper-based products that some growers have tried over the years, Coside being one of those. They have to be applied early and repeatedly in order to provide any amount of control. Oxidate 2.0 is another product that has recently been registered. It's a hydrogen peroxide based product, but along those same lines, it is recommended for multiple applications. So that single application really isn't going to give you a lot of control. So no real quick fixes when it comes to bacterial blight, but overall, the biggest thing is just watching rotation and making sure that you're not getting those beans in too close of rotation. One thing I kind of wanted to bring to your attention as well, I try to do this every year. We grow soybeans in Manitoba, we grow dry beans in Manitoba, and now we're growing more peas in Manitoba. Volunteer soybeans and dry beans are considered a food allergen. A lot of the buyers don't like to see soybeans and dry beans. A lot of the customers that they ship to have requirements to have almost a zero tolerance when it comes to having a soybean in a dry bean. So the concern here is watching your rotation, making sure you have at least 2 full growing seasons between a dry bean or a soybean and a dry bean. Otherwise, you will end up with volunteer issues. And depending on how green the soybeans are in harvest can be a real challenge. This year, I've also received a call on peas as well, and a grower looking to plant dry beans on some pea ground from a couple years ago. Now, peas are also considered a food allergen in the dry bean business as well. So I caution agronomists and producers to really pay attention to that, to your rotation, to make sure you don't have any issues with that. A few other things I kind of want to finish on here today is some of the challenges that we're always dealing with in dry beans is marketing requirements. Maximum residue levels on various products that we use. You really need to pay attention as an agronomist and as a producer to make sure that the products that you're using on your crop, number 1, are registered. Number 2, are putting on at the correct stage and the correct rate. If you're looking at pre-harvest, talk to your buyers to make sure that the products that you're using are something that is accepted into their marketplace. The worst thing in the world is making the assumption that something you've done over the years is still the same, and then you deliver the product and you find out that there's a problem with it because you sprayed something on it that you didn't check with your buyer with. Another good source of information is the Keeping It Clean website. The new update comes out every spring. It goes through some of the products of concern in different pulse crops in not only dry beans, but chickpeas, lentils as well. And just something to kind of keep in mind, this is constantly updated. I sit on the committee and we review these documents every fall to make sure everything's matching up with the MRLs moving forward. So with that, a few parting notes. This is something in dry beans that's rather unique to the industry, is that all of our seed typically comes in from the US. And moving forward, there's probably going to be some changes coming on with CFIA, and they're going to require all dry beans that are planted in Manitoba or in Canada to be registered. In the past, there's been some exemptions made. Won't go into all the details there, but basically what's been happening in the last 2 to 3 years is there's been a lot more varieties being registered, and that makes things much easier when growers and the bean companies are trying to bring in varieties. There are still a couple of varieties, in one in particular, Crimson Cranberry bean, that is not registered. So what theoretically could happen in the next couple of years is that if CFA comes down and says, well, all varieties must be registered, crimson is not, you won't be able to bring crimson in. The process is in the works right now. This particular variety is in the registration trial, so it will be put forward either this spring or into next spring. But overall, those are some of the things that you need to be very aware of. With that, I'm just going to wrap it up here. And just to tell you that dry beans are still pretty exciting. We're expecting, you know, just as many acres moving into 2020 and or 2021, I should say. We're probably going to see somewhere in that 150 to 170,000 acres. So down a little bit, but very similar. So just to give you a bit of a background on where dry beans are at in Manitoba. So